Hey folks, it's Patrick again. I wanted to follow up on a session we did about a year or two ago at user group about document steering, and a lot has happened since. And I got also the question from a lot of people how we can deal with purchase order requisitions in CSV. So here I put together an example on how um, purchase order requisitions can actually work in CSV. And I'm starting here Outlook because Outlook is actually the messaging system that I will use during the process. And so we will have a series of notifications that will go actually into my Outlook box or via my Outlook box. But the process is actually very simple. So I need to set up actually two things in to make a requisition process work using document steering. First, I need to set up a data sheet. And in this instance, I mean, I request just three pieces of information that I would like to track in the process of a purchase order requisition, which is a product description, which is a price. So somebody actually tells me what they want. And then a purchase order number, which is actually system generated and is actually stored in that data sheet so that we later on can manage the requisitions. So I create this data sheet, and this data sheet is then attached in the definition of the actual requisition itself. So here, for example, I do have my data sheets attached, right? I have this data sheet attached, which has the different data elements, and have assigned the individual rights of in the process where users can write and where they can see that information. So I could, for example, here in the purchase order process, could say like this person can only see the data versus edit the data. Um, the actual process of the hardware requisition itself is defined in using Visio. I mean, you have seen that the last time when we were looking at that about a year ago. The document steering module actually uses Visio and communicates the data live between the CSV system. And in this instance, what happens is actually fairly simple. I do have a start where somebody actually says they would like to get a new piece of hardware, like a laptop or like a cell phone or some other personal device. And then there's an automatic a process that makes the decision whether that is approved or not. Before it is approved, actually, is a budget decision. So if that budget is what they request is above $1,500, the decision is being made by the CEO. If that is below $1,500, it is done by the supervisor. So either of them, based on that budget decision, can then approve or decline the process. And if that is actually approved, it goes down to the purchase order process and receiving. And eventually you generate a notification to the user that actually initiated the request and then goes back. Or, of course, they can actually decline that request, in which case the user gets a direct notification without a purchase order being generated. So within CSV, what you do is once you actually have these data stored, you save that sheet and you close that so you can generate that. You have to actually set up a couple of additional data in the system, such as, for example, this budget. So let me show you what is actually happening here. So here's basically an initiator that does something, and then I have here like a process that is budget approval, which is actually automatic. So here I would actually set which person would do this process, and it can be a direct supervisor, it can be, the initiator. You can actually attach the individual, and in this instance, there is an option selection, which means it can only be one, and it goes if the price is larger than 1,500, it goes to the CEO. If it is smaller or equal 1,500, it goes to the supervisor. Right. So that means here I attach to that decision who the next successor is, and upon budget approval, I can also send a message and basically say send a message. I mean, I have here just one layout. It always goes to my same email account so that we can later on can see. So upon closing, when then the user actually has put in the budget that they requested and the decision has been made, the system generates a notification, and that notification goes to the initiator, and could go to other persons as well. It could have a different layout, and notifies him of that decision. So that is, done, or basically notifies him who is going to make that decision. And then the same, depending on the CEO or supervisor, it goes through the process of a notification whether that got approved or not. You can also notify the next position. So, for example, to do that purchase order. But here's something else unique, because what we have here is actually now, it's also new. There is now an interface in CSB, which basically means that when you actually then create the purchase order, that it actually takes a purchase order number from the purchase order and actually stores that in the workflow. That allows us then, in return, when the receiving is being done, that we say, here's a position, there's a step that actually is done, and here's attached that once the receiving is done, an email should be sent again to that person that is the initiator, so the person that initially requests. But a key difference is that we have here now an event attached that basically says close the element automatically, so there's no user interaction necessary, but there's just necessary that we go through in and close that particular purchase order in receiving. And that will then trigger the notification that whatever they requested can be picked up afterwards. So let's look at this a little bit more in action. So I have defined that process, and like I said, that is all done in Visio. You can actually create those in Visio and export them and send them to another system, and everything is done, and all the information stored in the process is done in Visio. So what we now do is I just go in here as a supervisor. And normally there would be a filter here that just shows for that responsible user the data and not for everybody. Yeah, and normally you just would see your own information. So in my instance here, I'm now a supervisor and just see all the individual triggers that are happening. And I'm starting now this process and say I would like to do a hardware requisition and hit start, which is then the start of the process. And I mean, for different reasons, I basically made the resolution here a little smaller so that we can watch the video nicer. But here's a data sheet. They can be next to each other. And on the right side, I would actually see where we are in the process. So there is actually like a process sheet. And now we would actually go and say, I would like to get a new product. And in this case, let's say, get me a Nokia Lumia 920. And which cost like I guess without contract or so, I don't know what it is, $648, I guess. And so please get me the latest phone that the Europeans are so crazy about. So I can put a note in there, and then have that information in there, and then hit close. So I actually request that information now, and now it actually went to the supervisor because the cost of the product was $648. So I have here now one element that is open that is actually for the supervisor, my direct supervisor, that will now need to approve this. And you see here, like, in the background, there was an email automatically done, or actually two emails in this instance. One was actually the hardware requisition with a purchase request. And then the second one is the actual budget approval process, where it actually did the decision on who makes that decision. So $648 was a price. So the selected decision automatically was that the supervisor needs now to approve this purchase. So the supervisor now has that notification. Once the process the image, he basically sees that notification. In this instance, the data sheet is restricted. They can only see the information that is stored in the data sheet, and now can decide whether that information is now approved or decline. So in this case, I approve, close, system generates the next step, which would be in this instance creating a purchase order. Again, in this step could be that there is additional emails being firing off that now people may be notified that they need to generate that purchase order, different other messages. So that is all up to the question of what kind of notifications you would like to send and how you want to have them look. But here in this instance, now you have the purchase order that goes to the purchasing supervisor. And in this process, what they would now do is actually start, and it is important to watch here now this data sheet which we attached. They would actually start the purchase order right from here via the button, because in this step we have the purchase order entry attached. And I start the purchase order from here right away. And in this instance, I just pick my vendor. Let's say this is here RFX company, whatever they do. And create my purchase order, and it goes into the dry goods reception in this instance, and I have here my let's say my miscellaneous purchasing item, and here I would say Nokia 920, right? So and get me one piece for $648. This is a normal process, because I think requisitions are mostly for incidental purchases where we really, sometimes don't have the item numbers in there. You could actually technically make that it runs via items and generates those. But most of the requisitions are things like a travel request to go to a user group meeting, or are about like getting a new cell phone, getting a new laptop, getting a new printer, or whatever people need for their personal use or for their work use. And so in this instance, I made that we just basically say we work with miscellaneous items and purchase whatever is in there, and then attach that information. So I created now the PO. I would actually email that out. That would go out to the vendor. All standard stuff. And now, since I actually did this, you see that the system now automatically populated the purchase order. And that basically means the system does now know what happens, and can now track the status of this purchase order. So let me close this out. And we see now the receiving step, but normally you don't need to work that. Just want to illustrate that, because this is actually now something that nobody would actually work on. I can, as a supervisor, a system supervisor can actually see that and could actually do something with it if there is something wrong with the process. But the point now being is that we have nothing to do with this document steering anymore, but work with receiving in CSB, just a standard receiving application, the Office application, and now would pull up that purchase order. Yeah, so this purchase order 105, and when we actually do this and receive against this, get that. Received in. Yeah, well, don't necessarily need a lot number for that, but anyway, receive that in, close that actual receipt here in CSB, and then we will see actually two things happening, because on one side we will see that we have another email, and in this instance, for example, the user now would get actually the notification here that the requisition was successful, that they basically did the receiving of the Lumia Lumia 920, and the user would now be able to go to the whatever place to pick up the stuff that was ordered. But what we also will see in document steering is when we go in there, that the process is closed. There's no data left anymore to work on, because the receiving got automatically closed once we actually received the purchase order entry with 2123. So I hope you enjoyed this. I mean, this is actually a very simple way of dealing with requisitions, especially for anything that is, required for, not as part of the regular course of business and regular course of operations. And it is very easy to set up. I mean, I was just in a training for like 1.5 days to learn how to do this. It's all done with Visio. It is very simple. It's very straightforward and can very quickly be implemented. What is required to put it in is that you need the CSB ECM database, the electronic content management database, which stores all the documents in the process. You need to have the new module called document steering in place, and you need to have a Visio license, at least Visio Professional 2007 or higher or further down, right? I mean, 2010 Professional is what I used here in this demo. All right. And so thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed this. And I'll talk to you soon again.